awesome to see how many of you have joined us today and seen that you are all over the country. And, you know, that really speaks very loudly to me that you are all really cognizant of the fact that this isn't an issue that's just impacting one of us or one of our states in one of our programs, but this is really, you know, the time for our national industry to come together, because the future of our industry is being dictated and determined right now. We are in multiple rulemakings with multiple agencies. You know, several of us are in rulemakings with our own states. We are in rulemaking with the USDA. We're now in rulemaking with the DEA. And it's really essential that we are coming together and ensuring that we're creating a framework that we all want to see. So thank you again for joining us today. I'm Courtney Moran, Chief Legislative Strategist for Agricultural Hemp Solutions. You know, I've been working on hemp policy for, you know, over 10 years now, and it is really incredible to me to see how far we have come. You know, I know there's a lot of issues going on in every aspect of our lives, and especially with the programs that we're working under and these frameworks that we're working under. But I always do want to take a moment to think about where we've come and where we are. You know, I mean, just 6 years ago or 7 years ago, we didn't even have hemp growing in this country. You know, 6 years ago, we had a few states that were growing just a handful of acres. Now, you know, we have full hemp legalization. There are thousands of acres being grown across this country. And it's really amazing how far we have come. But what's essential is that we keep making this exponential progress, and that we're not going to let regulatory overreach stop that progress, and that we're going to come together to ensure that we're actually moving things forward and creating a framework and a foundation that is going to allow our industry to thrive. And so, you know, tonight and tomorrow is going to be the harvest moon. And I know a lot of you are out there and you're in your fields and you're ready to harvest, and it's really exciting. Some of you operating under the 2014 Farm Bill, some of you operating under the 2018 Farm Bill. So, you know, I really wish you all successful harvest, and it's a really exciting time. But as you're all, of course, you know, very busy in your fields and prepping your facilities if you're on the processing or the drying end, and yet the multiple federal agencies are expecting you to still take time and present them with thoughtful comments on the regulations that are dictating your entire future and the framework for which your businesses have to operate under. And it's concerning. Sophia, do you want to start the slides? And so that's the whole purpose of, you know, why we are hosting this webinar today, to, you know, create a framework and help you make sure you understand of what's really going on from the regulatory perspective right now, but also to get feedback from all of you about what you are experiencing in your fields and facilities, what concerns you have, and to really reiterate the importance of this public comment period that we're in, especially with USDA, but also the public comment period that was recently opened with DEA. And so, you know, I'm going to say this multiple times today, the USDA public comment period as scheduled is only open until October 8th. We have 9 more days to make comments. It is absolutely essential and critical for you all to make comments. So yes, you can go to the next slide. Now, you know, we've been talking about these interim final rules that have come out from USDA for almost a year now. You know, they were published October 31st of 2019. They went into effect immediately, and a few states and tribal governments have already submitted plans that have been approved and have been operating under the 2018 Farm Bill and these interim final rules for this 2020 production season. The majority of the states actually decided to remain under the 2014 Farm Bill and have maintained their pilot programs. A few have slowly started switching over and transitioning into that IFR implementation, but many of them are holding off until this full implementation date, which is scheduled for November 1st, with that transition period ending on October 31st of this year, just 32 days from now. to protect the programs that they have built over the past 6 years. And, I've been having a lot of conversations the last few days. I've been visiting a lot of farms, and it dawned on me last night that, we're in the 6th year. Many people are in the 6th year of production or in the 6th year of their program. Some are in their 1st year. And through all of these years, our states have been able to learn so much and to be able to modify the programs to something that really makes sense for the farmers and the industry within their state. But for USDA, this is their 1st year. Think back to the very 1st year of your state and the different hurdles that you had to overcome and the different restrictions that you may have had in your programs and the advocacy that it took to actually build the program to what you have today. Some states like Kentucky, Oregon, Colorado, Vermont have been growing for a long time. Some like Texas, it's their very 1st year. So everyone's all over the board, right? But I just think it's interesting to really think about where USDA is and coming from their knowledge of this program. And because it is really their 1st year of creating this framework and for regulating the program, it's our job to educate them. So the last several days I have been visiting a lot of farms and visiting processing facilities, drying facilities. And, we've been having these discussions for, like I said, almost a year now about how unworkable these rules are. And I know, a lot of you are out in those fields, right? And firsthand, but being out there and just really seeing what is going on, how many days it's taking folks to get test results back from their labs, how many laborers they have in the field, and yet how many weeks it is actually taking them to complete a harvest. And knowing that the framework that has been set up by USDA creates, just for one example, this 15-day harvest window from the date of sampling, completely unworkable. And just hearing, from farmers in the fields and seeing what's going on, it's so impactful. And that message needs to be carried forward to USDA, to Congress, because without that message being conveyed and carried forward, they really are not going to be able to understand what you are going through and what you are experiencing every single day and the impact that it's going to have on your bottom line, the impact that it's going to have on the ability for your business to even operate. A lot of the farmers I've talked to, they've reduced the acreage that they have been growing significantly from last year, for a variety of reasons. Of course, the market decline had a lot to do with that as well. But, several of the farmers I met with have been telling me that if the regulations stand as is, they don't want to keep operating. They don't want to operate in a framework that makes them a potential criminal, makes them have the potential of losing everything because their crop tests at a 0.1% difference between what the threshold has been set at. So unless we, are able to make some changes to these rules and secure changes in the final rules, this is the framework that we're going to be stuck with. And this is the framework that our programs will continue to operate under. And, like I said earlier, we have participants today in this webinar from all over the country, right? This is not an issue that's affecting one farm in one state or one state's program. It's affecting everyone. And it's also not only affecting cannabinoid hemp production or flower production. It's affecting grain, it's affecting fiber. It has a potential negative impact on every single aspect of cultivation and every type of cultivation that we have the potential for. And so that is why we really have to, collaborate and be speaking together and talking with USDA about these issues. And so some of the issues that I have heard about over and over for the last, 11 months, and really especially in the fields the last several days, are that 15-day harvest window, the non-representative sampling methodologies, mandatory testing of every lot, with the lot being defined by the variety being planted. Some states have already required every variety being planted, but a lot of them have not. And, some folks have been able to designate their harvest lots in a lot of states and been able to commingle different varieties. That will no longer be possible under these interim final rules. Other states have actually created exemptions from sampling and testing for certified and known varieties that are consistently producing stable genetics and are coming out consistently below that 0.3 threshold. And And that will no longer be able to be possible under these interim final rules. And so some of these benefits and these gains that we have made over all of these years and protections that our programs have built will no longer be there. There will no longer be protection in our program if these interim final rules continue as is. You know, of course, there are numerous issues with the DEA going on. We'll briefly talk about that, but I really want to keep this webinar tailored to the USDA rules because we only have those 9 days left to make the comments. But even Secretary Perdue testified, you know, back in February and March before the House and the Senate committees, stating that DEA has had an influence over the USDA rulemaking. You know, we did not legalize hemp to restrict the USDA's regulatory framework over this program. We did not legalize hemp and remove hemp from the Controlled Substances Act and, you know, the definition of tetrahydrocannabinols from hemp, from the definition of tetrahydrocannabinols, to continue to allow DEA to have unnecessary oversight over our program. And, you know, I will say again, back to these comments, when folks submitted these comments back in January, it did have an impact, because in February, USDA put out that enforcement discretion guidance saying that they were holding off the enforcement of the DEA regulations requiring the registration for the labs. And they also held off enforcement on requiring the DEA registered reverse the agent to come in to actually destroy your fields if you test for a hot crop, and actually have now allowed for alternative destruction methods, traditional farming destruction methods that would be used for other crops. Now let's hope that those alternative destruction methods will stay. But I think it's very unlikely that that DEA lab registration requirement will no longer be enforced, because back in June, USDA started publishing on their website the list of all the DEA labs that have been registered around the state, around the different states. And so you can go on there and look and type your state and see what labs can I use that have actually been approved by the DEA and registered with the DEA. There's some states like Oregon, we don't actually have one lab in our state that's been registered. So it's unclear how that's going to operate, but this is still what those rules are calling for. Do you want to go to the next slide, please? And so that is why it's absolutely essential that we are advocating on a federal level and not only focusing on what's happening in our fields and only focusing on what's happening in our state, but really looking to the federal level, because the federal rules are dictating what is happening in your states. Under the 2014 Farm Bill, we had a lot of leeway. As long as your state had legalized hemp and were operating a pilot program, then we had a lot of leeway to do a lot of things in our states. That's why our states have been able to do so many different things. We've seen a lot of different frameworks across the country, but that will not be the case once these rules come into effect, because it's creating uniformity. And yes, the interim final rules do create a minimum standard that makes the requirements up to the moment of harvest. And states can, of course, make things more restrictive and have other types of regulations in place, but it really is dictating what's happening. And I have seen multiple states engage in rulemakings and change their programs because of the requirements that were put in place by the interim final rules that the states had to make the changes for just to submit their state plans. You know, some states like Montana actually made comments in their state plan of different sections that they did not agree with, and sections that they would continue to advocate against to have changed back to the way that they had operated under the pilot programs, including opportunities for remediation, including opportunities for allowing for exemptions from testing from these known and stable varieties. And so it's things like that that we're a potential of losing. And so the Agricultural Hemp Solutions Crossroads campaign is really tailored to bring the industry together, to have a cohesive message and bring that message to Washington, to ensure that all of your voices are being heard, that your business needs are being heard, so that these risks that we are facing with the full implementation of the interim final rules and the potential for these to become the actual final rules that will dictate the program going forward, to resolve those issues. And so our objectives for this campaign are specifically to have reasonable oversight over commercial hemp production. You know, we have learned so much over all of these years. We are an agricultural commodity. We are not a controlled substance, and we need to be treated as such. We would like to see adoption of rational final rules, rules that are actually workable, rules that make sense in the field and are not going to make things more burdensome on our farmers. Ideally, we would love to pass science-based legislation moving forward. I know we all have a very serious issue with this arbitrary 0.3% THC threshold. A lot of us would like to see this moved up to the scientifically based 1%. You know, that will absolutely take passing new legislation to do that. You know, there are different opportunities within the rules themselves, such as that negligence threshold, to change from that 0.5 potentially up to 1%, but the actual compliance standard, that threshold will require an actual new piece of legislation and changing that definition in statute. And really just overall broaden USDA's authority, right? They regulate agriculture. We are an agricultural commodity. We want USDA to have that broad authority and really get DEA out of the picture, but also to create protections for you and your businesses. That's what this is all about. These pilot programs were that. They were there for you to do research, to learn about this program. And we have learned, and we have gained so much traction, and yet all of these protections are potentially at risk if these rules go forward. And so that is what this Crossroads campaign is really, really all about. Next slide, please. Now, there's been a lot of advocacy that has been done over the last 10, 11 months. You know, as soon as these rules came out, we have been sounding the alarm in DC and among the national industry. You know, we want to make sure, number one, that everyone understands these rules and the impact that it's going to have on their businesses, these potential implementation dates, but also to make sure that USDA understands that these are not workable. This is not the framework that we set up. It is inconsistent with legislative intent. You know, collaborating with Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley, several letters have been sent already to USDA this year. Those two offices sent letters back in November outlining the clear legislative intent and the clear letter of the law, and where the USDA made different rules that are actually in conflict with what the letter of the law says and the legislative intent. They wrote a second letter in July to reiterate those same concerns, but also requesting an extension to the 2014 Farm Bill. And just a few weeks after Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley sent letters, then Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, he sent a letter, and he also outlined the same concerns and requested the extension until January 1 of 2022. And then a few weeks later, Senator Cory Gardner out of Colorado, he wrote a similar letter. You know, all the letters had a little bit different tone, but they all continued to request an extension of the 2014 pilot program so that we can continue to work with our agencies as they implement the 2018 Farm Bill and ensure that these rules really do reflect legislative intent. Now, the U.S. House of Representatives, in their continuing resolution that they actually passed on September 22nd, does contain a clause, section 122, that actually does create an extension of the 2014 Farm Bill, but only until September 30th of 2021, which would be 1 year from today. And so what that would mean was that rather than this transition period, which is right now scheduled for October 31st, and then full implementation going into effect on November 1st of 2020, 32 days from now, it would happen in 1 year from now. And while, yes, this would help us have additional time to consult and collaborate with USDA on these rules, this really is not the solution that we need. You are in the middle of harvest right now. If your regulations are transitioning again in the middle of harvest, it's either going to be this harvest or next year's harvest, that's still unworkable. That's not the solution we need. The solution that we need is something that's actually going to allow you all to complete your harvest, finalize your harvest. And so what I have been advocating for, and what the Senate offices have been advocating for, is a full transition until an extension until January 1 of 2022. So that's what all of those letters that have been sent by the senators do reflect, that extension deadline. Several senators have been working on the Senate side in their appropriations language to secure that additional extension. Now, the language that was put forward by the House does keep this conversation open for what is happening in the Senate. And so we're grateful that the House has passed this and approved this, but it really is not the solution that we need. We really need that full extension until January 1 of 2022. And if we get that extension, we will have more time. You know, it'll give us a lot more time to work with our states, work with USDA, work with other agencies in working to secure rational final rules. But if we don't get that extension, that transition period ends October 31st of 2020, like I said, 32 days from now. And USDA has been, you know, very clear for the past several months that their intention, you know, if the law does not change, their intention is to finalize these rules for the 2021 production season. That gives us months, only months, to make reforms and to influence the final rulemaking. And we can do that in a number of ways. And the first thing that we can do is participate in this open comment period. As I mentioned, that the comment period that was open back in January, you know, AGHS was able to secure that extension. We went from the 30-day to a 60-day comment period, which was fantastic. We saw more than double the amount of comments that had been before that extension period was granted. And like I already explained, those comments really did have an impact and helped get that enforcement guidance actually issued in February. And so I ask you to please make comments. It is absolutely essential that you make comments now, especially because USDA opened this comment period because they want to learn from you what has happened during this 2020 production season, especially for those that have been operating under the 2018 Farm Bill. What is it like? What are the struggles that you're having? You know, but for those that are still under the 2014 Farm Bill and are about to have this transition happening in your states, they need to hear from you because you are operating and you are about to have your entire framework changed if they don't make a change. And so it's very, very essential that you comment. They have to hear from you so that they know what is going on the ground, what your pain points are. But I will say that submitting comments that are just complaints is not going to be helpful. They want to hear solutions. And so talking about, you know, this is how long it's actually taking me to harvest. These are the costs. These are the number of laborers I have. These are the actual test results that I'm getting. This is how, you know, much over 0.3 total THC I am. And just really giving them as much data that you can and information that you can is going to be really essential to help make these changes. You know, we know that there are small businesses and farmers across the country having challenges with everything from their market conditions to the uncertainty of these rule frameworks. And if they don't hear from you about what those challenges are, they're not going to know. And that's what's so critical about this comment period. And so we have put together a Google form that we are happy to share with anyone following this webinar that will help you with those comments. You can fill it out. We are happy to submit it for you. You know, if you would like any more detailed type of comments, we are also happy to work with you on those comments and get those submitted. You know, like I said, it's very important that you have as much evidence and support with those comments when you submit them. But that's just the first stage, right? But this is also the end of the public-facing comment period. Once that comment period is closed, that public opportunity for engagement is over. And that's when it is really essential that we are using, you know, key folks to use our connections and use the relationships that we have built over all of these years to influence that final rulemaking. And that's what this Crossroads campaign is all about, to really support lobbying efforts to USDA and to Congress. If you want to go to the next slide. And so we have created tiers of engagement, and we are happy to share a full proposal with you about how to engage with the Crossroads campaign. The tiers of engagement make it accessible for folks at a variety of different monetary levels so that everyone, you know, we know everyone's going through a lot of different issues right now, and so that it will give everyone an opportunity to participate at whatever level that they can. But the more support that we have, the better. The more support we have, the more folks that we can bring onto our team to help convey your message in Washington, and the more advocacy that we can be doing. And, you know, depending on what level that you can come in at and support these efforts will, you know, determine your different deliverables. But these are the things that we are offering to the folks that have already signed up and the new folks that are going to be signing up for the campaign to help make this transition happen. And it's, you know, it's just really essential that we're thinking about what is going on, right? We are an agricultural commodity, but we are treating like a controlled substance, like we're criminals. You know, it is the presumption that you are going to go hot, and that's why these DEA lab registration requirements were put in place. And so it's time for that to stop. We have to stop treating hemp like it's a criminal issue and allow it to cross the road into legitimacy. You know, I had one farmer say to me 2 days ago, if we don't win, everyone loses. And, you know, I could not say it better myself. He is right. If we don't win, if we do not secure rational final rules, everyone loses. Our entire industry is at risk. And like I said, it's not just cannabinoid hemp flower production. It is every aspect of this crop, grain and fiber as well. And it's also a broader conversation too, that we all know how amazing this plant is. We know what it can do for our soil. We know what it can do for our environment. We know what it can do for our public health. And it's so critical that we really do band together to make these changes. And so I encourage all of you to reach out to myself and Sophia after this webinar. We would love to share our full campaign proposal with you and about how you can get involved, how we can help amplify your voice, and really how you can participate in this campaign to make a difference, not only for your own business's bottom lines, but for the industry as a whole. And so with that, I'm happy to open up for a few questions.
Okay, so we have several questions that people have been putting into the chat here. We've got a question from Dr. Sarah. She says, so how do you go about this science-based education? THC as a percentage can be manipulated.
I'd be curious if she's talking about pre-harvest or post-harvest. Post-harvest, of course. Pre-harvest, it's really about the genetics that we're putting into the ground. You know, are we creating a compliance threshold that is arbitrary, that is subjecting our farmers to potential risk of destruction, criminal prosecution, or are we creating a threshold that actually makes sense? And so I'd be curious if she has any follow-up about that question, about what she means about that.
Okay, so Dr. Sarah, if you'd like to follow up with that, you can also message me directly, and I will.
I think she just wrote in post-harvest. So yeah, post-harvest is a completely separate issue. You are absolutely right. THC can be manipulated post-harvest, but what's important to understand is that these USDA Interim Final Rules and the aspect of the cultivation language with the 2018 Farm Bill is about pre-harvest only. These USDA Interim Final Rules stop regulating the moment that the crop is harvested. And so what we're really focusing on right now is pre-harvest.
Fantastic. From Rachel Knox, she says, we need to end the trifurcation of cannabis, medical, adult, or hemp. All cannabis has industrial and medicinal uses, both non-scientific regulatory designation of hemp and marijuana. The trifurcation has created exceptional regulation that makes no scientific sense. I think hemp needs to stop trying to differentiate itself from marijuana. Cannabis, all things cannabis, needs to have a united front. Okay.
Yeah, Rachel, I agree with you. Long-term, 100% cannabis is cannabis, and that is what we want to see from a regulatory framework. However, given, you know, the historical aspect of what has happened, the reefer madness, that's just not where we're at. You know, ideally, long-term, we have all cannabis production regulated by USDA, and it doesn't matter what you have in the field. And then, you know, depending on what type of products you're making and the processing that you're doing, then you're regulated by the different channels that way. And so I agree with you. It should have a united front, but I don't think that we're there yet. And until we have marijuana legalization, I think that's going to be a challenge.
Cindy is asking about scientific backing for 1% total THC.
Yeah, I mean, there have been multiple reports over the years that have pointed to the intoxication threshold in cannabis at 1% THC. And so I've sent USDA and Congress numerous scientific studies that point to that, and that is what we've been advocating for since day one, since I started advocating, and that what we will continue to advocate for.
Thank you so much. And yes, I can definitely send everyone the Google form to fill out. We'll be happy to do that. Rachel says there should be cross functionality between hemp/marijuana legally, so long as the transfer/transaction is tight. Opens up economic opportunity as well. This or research, there should be no such thing as hot hemp.
I agree with you again, Rachel. You know, it's been very interesting, again, being in these fields and talking to farmers. I mean, we've known this over the past several years, right? But farmers literally being afraid that they're going to have their crop come back at 0.4 and that they're going to have to destroy the crop. And yet right down the street, there's a marijuana farm and these crops are testing at 28% and it's fine. And it doesn't make any sense, right? We should not be having farmers have the potential to have their crops burn at this arbitrary threshold. You know, and it's another thing too, is that, you know, we've switched over to this total THC compliance. That's not what the law says. The law in the 2018 Farm Bill, the definition for hemp is based on a Delta 9 standard. That is what it was under the 2014 Farm Bill. That is what the 2018 Farm Bill says. The testing methodology does specifically talk about post-decarboxylation or other similarly reliable methods, but a testing methodology does not determine compliance. And so the fact that that has been conflated in these interim final rules is a major issue and something that Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley have written to USDA about repeatedly, and that we as a collective industry need to be advocating for. That is not what the definition says. The definition is what determines compliance and what determines the distinction between marijuana and hemp.
And Courtney, if I can, really quick, I just want to say, I did write in my recommendation, and that is one of the things I recommended, that hemp processors, hemp cultivators and processors can sell into legal marijuana markets, right? You shouldn't be destroying the plant just because it's hot. That's the point. There got to be a different way to protect everybody's businesses and remediate with integrity. Thank you.
Yeah, I will say, Rachel, there has been pushback from the marijuana industry about that concept over the years. You know, the marijuana industry is in a very tightly regulated framework. They cannot operate interstate right now, and they have a lot more stringent security requirements, higher fees, etc. So I understand their objection to that. There are methods like we have done in Oregon where if you do have a pre-harvest compliant crop, but you have material post-harvest that is above the THC threshold, you are legally allowed to transfer that into our OLCC marijuana dispensaries. So there are ways to do this. We have done this in Oregon. It's been very successful for a lot of folks.
Thank you. We have another question here. I work for an FDA registered and inspected laboratory with a DEA controlled substance license, class 1, IV. Okay. We are interested in hemp testing services, but are wondering what the USDA requirements for this are. Also, what are some of the biggest problems for hemp cultivators regarding labs, such as long lead time? We are trying to improve this process to help farmers all across the country in this new and exciting industry.
Well, Grant, I'd be curious to know what state you're in, because not only USDA has put in the requirement that labs have to be registered with the DEA, but you also have to be complying with what your state program provides. And so different states are allowing different types of labs to participate. So for example, some states are only letting their actual state Department of Agriculture lab do this testing. Others have granted university labs the authority to do this testing. Others, like in Oregon and some other states, have allowed their marijuana testing facilities to do this type of testing. And so now this DEA registration requirement is an additional requirement. And so these labs that have been allowed to do this type of testing will now also have to have a DEA registration to continue to do this type of testing. So I would look to what your state or your jurisdiction, if you're in a tribal government jurisdiction, what type of labs that they are actually authorizing to do this type of testing.
Thank you, Courtney. Natalie asks, is the DEA still driving the narrative causing this trifurcation issue? And will scientific backing help drive this language change? Or is this something more cultural?
I would say it's both, Natalie. That, given with I'm glad you brought this up, given that the DEA has issued interim final rules that became effective upon publication on August 21st, that really is hitting home for a lot of our cannabinoid hemp industry, especially our processors out there. What they have all been operating under in the businesses that they have created are a framework that if we have a legal hemp crop, then they are able to make materials and get it to the end market as long as that end product isn't higher in THC. However, now those interim final rules from the DEA have come out and said that even if it came from a lawful hemp crop, if in your processing or in your end product is above that 0.3, it is now a Schedule I controlled substance. And so absolutely, they are driving that narrative. And I mentioned earlier that Secretary Perdue has testified before the House and the Senate and said that DEA has had a major influence on their rules. And so I will say, to try to help everyone understand, is that there's this big cannabis pie, right? We have this whole cannabis pie. And from what I understand the DEA's perspective is that the 2018 Farm Bill created this carve out, right? We have this whole pie. They created this carve out up to 0.3%. And that's our tiny little hemp piece in this big pie. And that they are making sure that nobody gets into this whole other, 99.7% of that pie. When the reality is that when we legalized hemp with the 2018 Farm Bill, we created a whole hemp pie. We want the USDA operating and regulating this whole hemp pie. And so it's really about ensuring that USDA gets to operate that whole pie and isn't being constrained to this tiny, tiny little sliver of a piece.
Thank you, Courtney. Jason asks, since the interim rules and draft rules in USDA and DEA have not been formalized, is there essentially a political dimension to this based on federal appointments following the election? If so, where do you see strong political allies?
That's a very interesting question, Jason. I actually had some folks ask me that over the last few days. So one thing I will say is that the interim final rules, you're right, they're not formalized, they're not finalized, but they are effective. So I don't want anyone to misunderstand that. They are in effect, they are operative, and those are the rules in place. On the USDA side, we have this transition period between 2014 to 2018 that we actually included in the 2018 Farm Bill. The DEA rules, however, they became effective on publication, so they are in effect right now. So it's very important folks do understand that. Now, whether or not, if there is a change in administration that's going to impact these rules, I think is yet to be seen. When the last administration came in, we saw the removal of the Cole memo, and I know that was more targeted toward the marijuana side of the cannabis industry, but it has been very helpful over the years for the hemp industry as well. And so we did see that change happen. And I just think it's yet to be seen. The statutes came down from Congress, right? And that is really what the framework is. And USDA is operating under that. DEA has been very anti-marijuana. They regulate marijuana, and it's a Schedule I for them, right? That's what the rules say. That's how they enforce it. And so I think a lot of it is historical, but I would be very curious to see what happens, and if that administration change, if it does happen, what that would do. I think what's really important is continuing to maintain our relationships with the senators and representatives that have been so supportive over all these years for hemp, and to continue to build those relationships and work with them.
Thank you, Courtney. Does anyone have any further questions for Courtney? Now is such a great time to, okay, Cindy's chiming in. Not only did the Farm Bill specify 0.3% Delta-9, it was also meant to be applied pre-harvest to immature plants and flowers, not the final dried, cured, trimmed buds.
Yes, Cindy, there's definitely a debate about post-harvest compliance. So I'm gonna leave it at that.
I had a question, if that's all right.
Sure.
I was wondering if you could speak at all to this discussion of hemp being defined by the USDA as an agricultural commodity crop versus specialty crop in terms of whether it's for seed or for fiber or for CBD extraction or for smokable hemp.
Right. So the Farm Bill did not look to those designations. There's been different conversations with USDA about designation as a specialty crop. There is potential depending on what type of crop you're actually growing and what the intended use is. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Courtney. Cindy says, when do we address this? I'm not sure.
Well, I would begin with your states, to be honest, begin with your states and also this DEA rulemaking. And so that is really critical. Participating in these public comment periods, both on the USDA side and the DEA side, is critical. And there has been a federal lawsuit that has been filed against DEA, specifically to address these rules that have come out and the inconsistency with legislative intent. So there is action being taken on that front. Different states have done different things. Like I've said, in Oregon, we actually allow the transfer of these materials into our OLCC dispensaries. We secure in policy the transfer of work in progress hemp. And, those are things that are going to have to address in both your state and on a federal level.
I'd like to encourage anyone who would like further information about Courtney's campaigns, and if you'd like to be on our mailing list, go ahead and send me your email in a private chat and I'll make sure and add you. Farmer Tom's in the house. Hi, Farmer Tom. He says, I have to get back to our harvest over here in Southwest Oregon. I recommend everyone use their networks to spread the word and save hemp as we know it. Thank you, Farmer Tom. Marnie has a procedural question. Assuming continuing resolution is signed into law, allowed pilot programs to continue into 2021. Does USDA also need to take action, amend IFR? Thank you, Rachel.
So if and when Congress does pass legislation that will create an extension, ideally until 2022, not 2021, but until 2022, then yes, USDA would have to amend the clauses that specifically end the transition period. And the conversations I've had with USDA state that what they would do is that, if it's before October 31st, states will have the option to not actually have their plans go into effect. If it's post October 31st and after November 1st, when things have gone into effect, that they will allow any state that had a pilot program, whether they've already transitioned to 2018 or not, to go back and continue operating under that 2014 Farm Bill program as long as Congress has now allowed. So yes, it may potentially, make USDA go back and make some changes, and it also may make states go back and make changes. But I guarantee farmers across the board are going to demand that those changes are made.
Sorry, can I unmute myself for a second? How long would that process take, do you think, through USDA?
Very quickly. They will act very quickly. It would be an emergency rule. And what your state, I would encourage all states to do the same. And likely they would.
Yeah, because we have 4 weeks.
We do have 4 weeks, but I mean, it's really going to be dependent upon Congress. How fast does the Senate act, and do they get a bill passed? And like I said, if it's before, it's going to be a little bit easier. If it's after, they will still act and apply that retroactively for folks.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Just another call for questions, and also thank you everyone who is sending their emails in to the private chat to me. We will be sure to keep you apprised of Courtney's campaigns and also link you to the Google form through which you can submit your comments and also help us bring your opinions and your data to Washington. So thank you for sending in your emails. We'll keep.
And please feel free to share. You know, when Sophia shares our campaign materials, when she shares the Google form, please, you know, share it with everyone you can. The more comments, the better. You know, like I said, back in January, when we secured that extension, there was more than double the amount of comments that went in, and it clearly had a very positive impact. And so I really, really highly encourage you to submit comments on your own. If your attorneys, encourage your clients to do it. If your consultants, encourage your clients to do it. Really, I mean, the more comments, the better. And if you have questions, you know, about any of this, please follow up with us. You know, we're here to help, and we want to really help secure a solid future and foundation for our industry.
Are there any more questions? Let's see, we've got a new one here. Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming. Courtney, as always, thank you so much for being such a champion of this industry. We've had a great turnout today. I hope you all got a great deal of information and encouragement from this webinar. We will keep in touch. And if there are no further questions, I would like to wish everyone a great day, and we'll see you in the next one.
And good luck with harvest, everyone.
Happy harvest.